Hi guys, I hope you all had a fantastic week so far. And in today's video, I'd like to share with you 5 things that I really like about the Canon 5D Mark IV as a wildlife photography camera. I own this camera for roughly a year now, and I am not sponsored by Canon. I just want to share with you the experience that I have with this camera in wildlife photography. I just want to name that I use this body mainly as a second body next to my Canon 1DX Mark II. If you're new to this channel, I want to welcome you and encourage you to subscribe if you like our content, and please make sure to enable all notifications so that you don't miss out on new videos coming out every week. Now let me start by saying that the Canon 5D Mark IV wasn't designed specifically for wildlife photography, but rather is Canon's all-rounder DSLR camera suitable for a range of subjects. All images that you get to see throughout the video are taken with the Canon 5D Mark IV in RAW format and processed with basic adjustments in Adobe Lightroom. Now, as a wildlife photographer, it definitely makes sense to have 2 different camera bodies with 2 different focal lengths attached, as things happen quickly in wildlife photography and you don't always have the chance to change lenses. So the thing that I like most about having the Canon 5D Mark IV is that it has the almost identical button and menu layout as my Canon 1DX Mark II primary body. I cannot stress how important it is to just put down one camera, pick up the other one, and seamlessly start shooting with the same buttons, the same menu, and the same shooting mode. My preferred shooting mode is manual with auto ISO. If you would like to know why, there's a link right on the top. It is really important for me that both my camera bodies can shoot in the same way. And previously I used to own a Canon 5D Mark II as my secondary body. Although I could shoot in manual with auto ISO on that camera, it did not allow me to use exposure compensation. That was a big disadvantage since I use exposure compensation all the time, which eventually made me switch to aperture priority. And even as a seasoned photographer, I found it super annoying to having to switch the whole time between manual with auto ISO on my Canon 1DX Mark II and aperture priority mode on my Canon 5D Mark II. So I'm really happy that my Canon 5D Mark IV finally is able to do manual with auto ISO and exposure compensation as well. The next thing I really like about the Canon 5D Mark IV is its high-resolution 30 million pixels full-frame sensor, compared to my 1DX, which has only 20 million pixels. Now this comes in really handy when cropping into images, which is something we often have to do as wildlife photographers if we can't get close enough to our subject. I have now more megapixels at my disposal and therefore more flexibility on cropping the image the same amount without losing too much of the image quality. Now this is especially important when printing images, as the quality of the printed picture directly depends on the amount of data or pixels available to create a clean, bright and defined print. As I have mentioned before, the Canon 5D Mark IV wasn't specifically designed for wildlife photography, and the 5D series traditionally was always a little bit more orientated on landscapes and portraiture. However, with 7 frames per second and 21 RAW files before the buffer hits in continuous shooting, I think Canon has made this camera very capable of dealing with most wildlife situations. Of course, this is only half of the frame rate than my Canon 1DX Mark II offers, but it is also half the price, so I can easily live with that, especially using this camera as my secondary body. Photographers will never complain about more dynamic range and color depth. And that is my fourth favorite point of this camera. Both dynamic range and color depth have been slightly improved over my Canon 1DX Mark II, which makes the recovery of shadows and highlights so much easier. There is noticeably less noise while it's doing a better job at preserving color and detail. If you would like a little bit more detailed information about the dynamic range performance of the 5D4, head over to dxomark.com, where you will find numbers and charts that show the performance of the dynamic range with different ISO values. Number 5, and probably the most pleasant feature using the 5D Mark IV, is that it has the same sophisticated autofocus system than my 1DX Mark II. Having an improved dynamic range and high pixels is nice, but only if you can nail the focus. Having 61 autofocus point coverage, of which 41 is of the more accurate cross type, is fantastic and makes it super easy for me to switch between the two cameras. And since I often have to use extenders with my telephoto lenses to get closer to my subjects, I appreciate that all 61 autofocus points, with 21 being of the cross type, work at f8. That makes it really easy to do precise focusing. Shooting quite a fair amount when the ambient light is low, I need a solid autofocus performance even in that conditions. And the 5D Mark IV delivers, with autofocus performing very well, with light levels as low as -3 EV. As a last note on the autofocus, I really do enjoy the autofocus selection button that is unique to the 5D Mark IV and that lets me very easily switch between the different autofocus points. That's it. These are my 5 favorite things about the Canon 5D Mark IV for wildlife photography. If you have this camera as well and you shoot wildlife, please let me know in the comments down below what you like or maybe don't like about it. If you're interested to see how I've set up my 5D Mark IV for wildlife photography, please also leave it in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time. Bye bye!